Hello everybody, and welcome to another edition of Zach on Sports. I'm your host, Zach Gershman. Today, I have the great pleasure of being joined by one of the most recognizable voices in Philadelphia sports, Mr. Dan Baker. Welcome, Mr. Baker.
Hi, Zach. How are you?
Good.
Thank you for having me.
Mr. Baker is the voice of Citizens Bank Park. He has been the Phillies PA announcer since 1972. He's been the Eagles announcer for close to 30 years. He has broadcasted the Drexel Dragons men's basketball games. He has broadcasted the Big Five basketball games, and he is also a part of the Big Five Hall of Fame and the Philadelphia Sports Hall of Fame. So welcome, Mr. Baker.
Thank you, Zach.
You are now the longest tenured public address announcer in Major League Baseball since Bob Shepard retired. How did you get your big break, and when did you ever think that this would last 40 plus years?
No, you can't predict something like that. Of course, it's been my great good fortune that it has. As far as my big break, Zach, like you, when I was a young man, I was a pretty good athlete. And, like a lot of young American boys, I dreamed of maybe being a professional someday, basketball, football, baseball, but of course I wasn't nearly good enough. And then I began to think, I love going to the games so much. I remember when my father took me to my first baseball game at Connie Mack Stadium, 21st Street and Lehigh Avenue. I thought I entered heaven with the light standards and the green grass in the middle of the city, and all the sights and the sounds and the smells, the food, the cheering. I just thought, I got to find a way to be close to this someday. And so I was always a big sports fan. I loved all the Philadelphia sports teams, root for all the Philadelphia sports teams. And so I used to mimic the announcers of the day. Do you remember Dave Zink? Well, you're too young, but Dave Zinkoff was a great PA announcer for the Philadelphia Warriors and the Philadelphia 76ers, Harlem Globetrotters. So I used to emulate the Zink. And at forward, number 6, Julius Erving. Anyway, he was great. I loved him. And so my friends and family would say, hey, you ever take these guys pretty good. Maybe that's something you ought to consider someday. And so I went to Glassboro State College. At that time, all the students were education majors. Graduated, became a teacher. When I was still there, my first 2 years I played basketball there. My last 2 years, I got a job at Channel 48, which is not too far from where we're taping Zach on Sports today. 3201 South 26th Street, WKBS TV. Worked in the mailroom. Made the princely sum of $50 a week, $1.50 an hour. And but I had a chance to meet Stu Nahan, who was the ring announcer, the play-by-play announcer ringside for the Rocky movies, the white-haired man. And I used to fill in doing the WWF. There was a guy that I met there named Buddy Wagner, and so I used to imitate him. And on those rare occasions when he couldn't make it, they would say, well, who do we get as a replacement? They said, this kid, he sounds just like him. I got in there, that opened some doors. But my big break was when a wonderful gentleman named Pat Cassidy, who was the former director of stadium operations at Veterans Stadium, which was just across the street from where we're taping at Citizens Bank Park. He told me after the Phillies opened that stadium in 1971 that they were thinking of making a change in PA announcers. And by this time I had already done a part-time radio show on WFPG in Atlantic City, and I did statistics and spotted for a lot of visiting NFL radio and TV play-by-play announcers. So Mr. Cassidy said that he thought he could get me an interview with Bill Giles. And he did. The interview went very, very well. And Zach, that was my big break, because when Bill Giles hired me in the fall of 1971 to be the Phillies public address announcer starting with the April 1972 season, it really worked out. Now I'm entering my 44th year doing that. And but that opened a lot of doors for me. Now I wasn't just Dan Baker. Geez, who were you? What'd you ever do? Was Dan Baker the Phillies PA announcer? All right, come in, we'll talk. So it opened up a lot of doors.
You have been a part of 2 World Series championship teams with the Phillies.
There's the 2008 World Series championship ring.
Can you compare the 2 different teams?
They were 2 wonderful teams, and and they represented 2 very successful periods of Phillies history. And of course, as you and your dad know, I do a radio show with Greg Luzinski. I co-hosted on WBCB Radio 1490 AM in Bucks County. He's become a very good friend. He was one of the greatest sluggers in Phillies history. They really had a great Mike Schmidt, Steve Carlton, oh my goodness, Larry Bowe at shortstop, Manny Trio at second on that 1980 team. What a team. Ron Reed. There were some really good relief pitchers. And then, of course, Ryan Howard and Jimmy Rollins and Chase Utley. What another really, really good team. There were 2 different teams, 2 very good teams, and very comparable. Of course, the more recent team went to back-to-back World Series. Only time that's ever happened in over 130 years of Phillies history. But the nucleus of that team from the 70s and the early 80s, they went to 2 World Series, though not back-to-back. And they probably would have gone back-to-back had the baseball season not been strike-shortened in 1981. The Phillies won it in 80, and they were the first half champs in 81, played the Expos, and then lost in a playoff. And then they came back in 83 and lost to the Orioles. They beat the Royals in 1980. I'm not wearing my 1980 ring tonight, but I do have one, I'm proud to say.
Throughout all of the Phillies games you've announced, which game stands out the most?
The 2 games where we won the World Series, beating the Kansas City Royals. That was Game 6 of the 1980 World Series, and then Game 5 of the 2008 World Series when they beat Tampa Bay. Those are the 2. That was great.
Last week, the Eagles beat the Cowboys in Dallas. In 1995, during the Cowboys-Eagles game at the Vet, that will forever be known as the 4th and 1 game. You were the public address announcer then. Share with us your memories from that game and that play in particular.
Well, I was so frustrated when the first time it came up 4th and 1. I'm a big Eagles fan and remain a big Eagles fan. I sure want them to win their first Super Bowl, and they have a chance this year. But on that 4th and 1, and of course it was Emmitt Smith who carried the ball. And here are these Cowboys. They're in their own territory, like their own 29. And they had the audacity to go for it, 4th and 1. I really wanted the Eagles to stuff them. I can't be a cheerleader on the public address microphone. But I can raise and lower my voice. I know how to emote, and without being a cheerleader, I can raise the level of my voice and I think capture the emotion of a moment. And of course, you also have to know when not to talk. When that's as important as knowing when to show excitement in your voice. You can't show excitement all the time. But on this particular play, it was a very, very late flag that stopped the play. I mean, the play had already started, and then came, I don't remember whether it was a 2-minute warning or a timeout that the Cowboys had taken. But anyway, the officials came in after the play was stopped, and they're waving it off. So, we were all like in shock, like what happened? And they explained it, and of course they're doing the best that they can. And I admire the work of our umpires in baseball, referees in football, officials in basketball. So now the Cowboys wouldn't dare do this again, would they? My goodness, here they come again, those sons of guns. So I got my little zinger in there. I said, 4th and 1 again. I got the again in there, but it wasn't meant to show anybody up. Just that the little bit of frustration. That my goodness, the Eagles had this great defensive play. Now they got to go through the whole thing again, But that was pretty exciting, and that's my recollection of that historic moment.
You have announced so many games, athletes, and great moments. What's your favorite name to announce?
Well, there's a few of them. You know, I have had the privilege to announce so many of the great Phillies and Eagles: Reggie White, Randall Cunningham, Donovan McNabb, Brian Westbrook, and in baseball, Mike Schmidt, Greg Luzinski, Steve Carlton. I would say to you that the favorite names tend to be the polysyllabic names, multiple syllables, ones which lend themselves to a more melodic interpretation. I just emailed one of them today. Number 12, second baseman Mickey Morandini. That's one of the favorites, but of course Greg Luzinski. Number 19, left fielder Greg Luzinski. There's a couple.
Yeah. Before we conclude, I have one last question. Is there anything you would change?
No, there's not. You know, I can say, and I think the sports fans of Philadelphia know, that whether it's a Phillies game, an Eagles game, a Big Five game, you know, LaSalle, Penn, St. Joe, Temple, or Villanova, Temple football, Penn football, I did those games. I do the Army-Navy game too, you may know. And I put every ounce of energy into every game I ever do. I don't leave, you know, anything, you know, in the cupboard, so to speak. And so I give it everything I have. I'm a stickler for accuracy and making sure that I know how to pronounce somebody's name. I ask in advance and make sure of that. And I wouldn't change a thing. I'm very grateful for a wonderful career, and I hope it keeps on going for another 10 or 15 years.
All right. Thank you, Mr. Baker. That's it for this edition. I'll see you guys next time on Zach on Sports. This episode of Zach on Sports was sponsored by RecruitMe Technology. Today's technology, tomorrow's athlete. Get mobile, get scanned, get recruited. For more information, visit recruitme.com. That is REQRUITME.com.